This is Hunting Fields by Dr. Peter Colla. I am the hooded vigilante. I will be reading chapter 13 today. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody that Dr. Peter Colla self-publishes and gives this book out for free. Yes, you can buy a copy and it would support this. He's given away over 1,000 books of his previous books that he's published. And we always encourage people in this end times battle to share the information you get, share the truths. That's how you join the fight. You join the fight not just by listening and realizing things are happening around you, but then you share them. So is it also with healing. If you receive a healing, if you receive the information to become healed through the grace of God, learning the truth, etc., then it is your obligation then to share these truths with others. Okay, I'm going to read chapter 13, if I can get the thing to sit still while I try to read it here. It keeps bouncing back. So, chapter 13, Hunting Fields, padded cells. All modern medicine, regardless of purpose, is formulated within an industry founded in witchcraft. With the medical treatment effects they produce are based on natural remedies, plants and oils. These are only baiting on a hook of a malevolent benefactor. Their ultimate purpose is to enslave, depress, and suck out all the life, extracting with paid consent every gift God has freely given until no remnant of human remains, and death is not only desired, but prayed for. Esther wakes up, her vision blurred by the mud of her memory. Her arms and legs are strained as she feels as she's been thrown into a deep swamp-like bog and desperately tries to swim back to the surface, unable to push against the roots and debris that entangle her. She can hardly move her limbs. Every breath is like sucking through the suffocating thick black pillow. She opens her eyes, expecting only the blackness of night, yet she's met with an almost blinding light in flashes and fog that fills her mind like peering through a vast fishbowl. Her eyes blurred from the dry dirt and tears. The paste and taste of parched sand makes even swallowing impossible. Did they bury her alive? Suddenly, her own fear of claustrophobia sits in, ushering up its own adrenaline that flows through her blood like fire. She hits her head against the wall of this coffin in desperation to be freed. What seems like only moments or perhaps months later, Esther wakes up sitting in a padded cell. Is it a cell or a wall of the coffin, the same coffin they buried her in? She hits her head again, this time more painful against the edge, twisting spastically, unable to move her hands or feet. The flashes of light in her eyes, she only starts to have memories of being bound to an examining table, seeing a doctor start to give her an injection. Her head swims as she also sees him give her pills, red one white, and then a blue. His face shifts from a demon to a witch of her nightmares and then back again. Half a building away, a doctor reaches in his pockets and pulls out a white pill, swallowing without water. The bitter acid taste in the pill goes down painfully. He looks up from the trance of the fire of the two soldiers, one an SS officer, Jurgen, his own son, draped in a white lab coat, the other in an all-black Gestapo version of the dark elite team. The few he prefers steps up, looking in for more instruction. his firstborn son, while the boy always seemed adequate, enthusiastic about his work, lacked the calculative ability of the higher functions necessary to even aid his father in his experiments, yet alone perhaps follow someday in his footsteps. Yet his devotion is valuable. Hendrik was always thankful he could keep the boy assigned to him and not be sent off to fight the Cossacks. His mind seemed to jump free, and like he had suddenly somewhere else or someone else, a side effect of one of the pills he himself proudly produced. One of the powers extracted from blood. These fools cannot begin to understand its potential. The other black-clad officer, one of a more obvious Aryan descent, a handsome young boy, guard, turns in obedience, flanking Jurgen as they in unison step up to the doctor. Herr Colonel, we've cleared out all the cells. All the children are gone, those animals, along with the Judah. What will you have us do with the woman in cell 7? In all the commotion, he had forgotten about her. The doctor shakes his head, trying to access memories, like grabbing at popcorn kernels as they pop out of a hot pan. Another side effect of the pills, usefulness he may have to develop in the future. Oh, how he wanted so badly to cut into that pretty fresh flesh, the Jew sympathizer. Yet this one came right from the top. She was not to be killed, only detained, drugged, or even tormented, especially since he was instructed she was not only physically harmed in any way. That order came right from his own cousin years ago, yet said nothing of breaking her mind. It's a bittersweet when she suddenly fell back into his grip. Her father is here again, demanding her release, orders signed by some SS field commander himself. The young man says, handing his father a signed release. He examines the order, and with a hateful smirk, he crumples the paper and tosses it in the fire. Jurgen stares forward with his eyes blank and emotionless. He can have her. I've given her so many drugs, I'd be surprised if her mind wasn't mush by now. Just get them out of the building and nowhere near the fires as soon as you can, he says as the two young men slap their heels in obedience and start to turn leave. No harm to her or her family, that's an order. He hands the boy a tin of containing pills to give to the girl. She needs to take these. Jawohl, Herr Doctor. The son and the soldier both say in unison and quickly slapping their heels together and salute in a more Roman style against their chest rather than saluting forward in the typical German straight arm. Esther head reels from pain, and she's at a strange sensation surrounds her as if her head has been covered in a thick blanket or thick as glass in a glass box. Her ears are still ringing all muffled sounds as her right eye, laying against the wall, is so swollen she couldn't open it to see the pad right before her face. Flashing lights, and she feels hands on her body and fear as they touch her. You cannot touch her or her family. She's already overcome. She hears them say in her dreams, and again feeling her head is underwater. She can hear a German man speaking to someone else. How useless is this one? The other figure, long, tall, dark, turns and walks at her in deep, inhuman voice. There's something about her. She's not a seed, but maybe she's connected. You must find out. Her vision fades to black again. A large clank of a metal lock and suddenly light, and a door creaks open, almost wakening Esther from the nightmare she only now begins to wonder. Had she maybe imagined everything? She moves away from the door, almost as a reaction, knowing nothing good comes from that sound. Another flash, and she's in a tight cage, trying desperately to move her arms and free herself. Another hand as she's pulled on the locked door. A sudden shocking kick shudders the wall of the cage, and the pain shoots through her body, causing her head to hit the edge of the cage. She spits out the pills they put in her mouth, hiding them under her tongue. Her head seemed to just begin to surface from the deep mud bog. She only moments before was sure she was swimming for her life. The brightness of the light for the briefest moment condenses into a form of bright angel as she disappears to the form of a man, followed by a young teen boy with a large smile walks in the room. Her father comes in and starts administering some kind of treatment to her head, which she at first pulls away in an almost instinctive fear until she realizes he's trying to help her. I'm taking you out of here. They say you've had another schizophrenic episode. You've come in here hitting your head against the padded wall for months now, confused and with only one seemingly clear eye. Esther looks up at her father, who knows as much compassion as he perhaps has shown her entire life. Where am I? The fog of her own memories and senses felt like she had been buried alive in a coffin, or maybe inside of some cruel dark fishbowl for longer than she can remember. She looks at her legs, having only the slightest telltale marks from the lacerations she knew only moments before were there. Nothing but maybe distant light lines of scars and a few fresh scratches, most perhaps years rather than weeks old. Her father sees her looking at the old scars on her legs and her arms and says, "You were cutting yourself again. We found you only days ago. After you returned from Berlin, you were hysterical." "Berlin, Teo?" she says in confusion as the fog of the drugs fades from her mind, like a parting of a deep, dark mist shrouding the countryside. "Teo," her father says, confused. "You went to the SS High Command to find out about Heinz, your husband. Remember him?" Turning back to the stacks, only a few pages on a small pile at his feet, Heinrich picks them up and tries to stuff them into the already oversized leather briefcase. The German High Command emblem with its skull and bones stamped prominently on the flap. "This will not do," he says to himself as he glances around for an adequate replacement. The enemy will be at his doorstep in days. He must get most of his precious materials. The most sensitive he must hide on the personal bodies of his own children. They may not check the smallest one. It's one thing to carry rocket information, chemical, laser technologies, or other mechanical baubles one might trade for freedom. Another thing altogether if they find experimental papers linking him to mutilations of Jews, especially women and babies. He will never get past the regular soldiers with his life. They would skin him alive. In the West, the people were still not tolerant of his kind of experiments either, but there are many higher ups, fellow lodge grandmasters, who desire the same dark outcomes he does. His hallowed Grand National Mother Lodge, the Green Globes, the Three Globes, the brilliance of his ancestral Frederick the Great, seeing even then the need to spread it to at least 3 continents if success was possible. In the West, he might be allowed the freedom to continue his work in secret. In the East, those fanatical lunatics and their desire to control everything, the Russians, are not to be trusted. No, the West is where he must go. He glances back at the burning boxes, the result of years of experiments. Taking these treasures and joining those idiot rocket engineers is an insult, but it's a means to an end. His only regret, he just did not have enough time for what he was looking for in this place, with even he must admit is no longer safe. Too many choices, options, variations for one man, even a whole team to sort through, and now to waste what he's already done. He is not the only one who feels population of the world needs to be dramatically reduced, or more manageable levels at least. His dear cousin tells him pretty much all the time, true leaders of the world feel this way. Carve out the best specimens for breeding and harvesting sake. Keep the strongest and few that show real talent for technical support, and then dispose of the rest. He just happens to be the one of the few that actually works towards realizing the world domination view instead of sitting on his hands in fear that the sheep might find out the landowner really doesn't love them and just uses them for slaves, breeding, or food. Another snicker as he sets aside his box of photographs. This one must come, even if he has to smuggle them sewn into the abdomens of his children. The thought he has contemplated steadily more consideration. He knows control, especially cruel, absolute control. It's one of the main tools he uses in his super soldier experiments. His special SS Corp. Lust and disgust. Take them, find a hook, the flaw, and use it to control every aspect of their life. Tear them down physically first. Their dignity, their health, control, poison their food, infect, dissect, and inject them. Take away from them anything they've had given, their very minds, even their sense of self-worth. Leave them nothing whatsoever. When you have drained every fragment of their strength, all their youth, stripping them of anything that even remotely resembles life, it is then you have access to manipulating their soul. That is what he wants. Tear from them their souls. Another crooked smile slithers across his lizard-like lips. Yes, definitely the West is where he needs to go. Get them so desperately they will trade their souls for a bowl of soup. They won't even care if the broth was cooked with the bones of their children. Another smile across his crooked smile of his face. More boxes. With a quick glance, he shoves them into the blazing barrel right in the middle of his lab. At least in the West, they're driven by something greater than even control, materialistic greed. He will use the lust for greed to get them to give him what he wants, the bridge to the dark spirits and a new start to grow his dark secret seeds into life. His mind races to the thought of dark molds, many of which he's used in his earlier experiments, burying them, injecting them, or forcing them to ingest it into the bodies of his screaming victims. Another crooked smile crosses his lips as he imagines the dark tentacles of toxic growth erupting from the edges of the eyes or reproductive organs, almost like oil oozing out of the ground on the edge of a swamp in some stinking land he is living in now. That's it. He tosses the last file into the flames, grabs the small stack. Turning to rush out of the burning room, he looks down the hall both ways for his son as he starts to the garage and then onto his house just outside the makeshift hospital camp. Memories now come crashing back into Esther's head, meeting the young German boy. They brief but passionate love and marriage. Her fathers always seem to like the boy. He's good. Business head on his shoulders. She remembers her father saying, as she cried when she heard he had to join the war, and how much more when she heard he was being sent to the Russian front. Her father promised he would do something to get the boy reassigned back here to Heidelberg, but no word on a single remote postcard. He didn't even get to see his child. She reaches instinctively for her belly, almost expecting to feel the baby there as she realized she had the child now well over a year ago. Panic. She sits up and turns desperately around, looking around as she screams, "Where's Ruth? Where's my child?" Her father tries to restrain her, surprisingly needing to use more strength than he thought she had. As he tries to calm her, "They took your child into social services." Her eyes were now wide with fear as she looked back at her father in fright. "Don't worry, the moment we realized you were here, I used all my power to locate the child, and I have been watching her closely. No harm has come to her," he says, as much as reassurance as he could, and releases the grip on her shoulders. "We first need to get you out of here, and then we can get Ruth back to you. The doctor keeps wanting us to bring the child in, saying it would help you to recover," her father said softly, not wanting to be heard. "But we kept stalling. We have to get you and the child away from here now." "Where is Peter? Is he all right?" she says as her father looks at her in confused amazement. "We need to protect him. They're after him to stop his right hand, she said, as she starts to fade, closing her eyes and falling limp for only a moment, her near exhaustion as her father gathers her into his arms. It's only as she calms with the words does she open her eyes and sees her little brother Dieter step up from behind the father, now a teen, small but lanky. She cannot mistake his wide smile on his face. I played with Ruth almost every day this week. She's staying with Herr and Frau Schmidt until you can get better, the skinny boy says as he steps up to his older sister. Are you better, sister? Peter, are you okay? She reaches out and embraces her brother, who at first looks surprised, but soon relaxes in her warm embrace. The thin and lanky boy pulls away with slight confusion on his face. I'm Dieter. Why do you call me Peter? Don't you remember me? The boy inquires with the same confused look, turning to smile on his face as only slightly leans back to look. Her father takes her in her arms and presses them to stand. They put you here under the good Dr. Mengele's care, but I think you're ready to come home. We are leaving this place, her father says, trying to downplay her confusion. He said they needed to heavily sedate you for the schizophrenia and the near suicidal depression, but I don't believe them. I think you're confused seeing it was the same doctor that helped you way back when you came from Berlin. Even your head wound is in the same place as the one you had after the train wreck, her father said, trying to make sense of the confusion. Thank God you lived through that, but yes, it's now been 5 years. Time to go. Let's go. Let's go home. Would you like that? Dieter asks as he takes her hand. Dieter remembers the last time she held his right hand. He was only 5 when they burned the synagogue. So many of his friends were scared that day, standing watching with their heads down. But even more frightening was the large mountain of books the Germans burned on that famous Kristallnacht. The young man thought to himself as he looked at her hand in his. The image of the German men standing on top of the burning synagogue is as burned into his memory as the mountain of burning books, many of the same he had already grown to love. Dieter helps his older sister to her feet as the father prompts them now quickly to the door down the corridor. He remembers seeing real fear in the eyes of his older siblings, even his father, and most frightening of all, his powerful Uncle Theo, struggling to hold his sister's hand and give her some support as she stands. Other than that night, he has never seen either of these men afraid of anything in their lives. Esther balances herself more confidently, taking her brother's hand and wrapping her other arm with affection around his right hand. And with a smile, she shakes her head, completely awake, and gains strength to walk. Peter, she says affectionately, says as she smiles at him and looks at his right hand. Are you okay? One of the white-coated German assistants, his soldier's clothes clearly visible under, the same one often assisting the doctor, steps in behind and hands the father a tin of pills, instructing him quietly as he turns to leave. You keep saying Peter. Do you mean to protect Dieter? Stop his right hand? Why Dieter? Stop him from who? Her father says as he steps up to support her into the hall. From them, she says it in an eerily but increasingly strengthening voice as she glances at the white coat dressed assistant that just walked out of the cell, almost sprinting down the hall to escape. He holds the tin before her as she forcibly hits it out of his hand, spilling the large blue pills onto the floor. His face shows frustration, but pulls her to leave, not wanting to even take the time to gather the medicine. The doctor hurries down the corridor as his son meets him halfway, and without a word, does an about face to follow his father, the two soldiers marching increasingly in their strides to match the now almost trotting colonel, turning the final corner to exit the building. Just as he almost walks into Esther holding the hands of her younger brother, Dieter, everyone freezes. Esther's family is immediately shocked by the rushing doctor. Their usual fear of confronting three SS officers strangely absent, while the doctor suddenly seemed to be experiencing fear himself as the result. Not fear from the father, who was quite the senior of the doctor, but of the girl herself. Excuse me, the doctor says as he tries to act casual in front of the girl's father. Yet it is the boy he can't seem to take his eyes off of. Confusion is clearly on the face as he tries to look closer at the boy around the woman who's now completely cleared her mind and does not hesitate to bar the boy from the gaze of the doctor, of the German officer. Esther pulls the young man closer to herself and looks at the doctor in his ridiculous white coat with his stained Nazi uniform underneath. She stares at the man's aged face. Her father again turns to the door, trying to also step up to the side and let the officers pass. Is this your younger brother, dear Esther? Is this your younger brother? I didn't know you had a younger brother. You never mentioned him. The German officer now shifts his papers and overstuffed briefcase, trying to get a better look. I hope my medicine has accomplished progress with your schizophrenic diagnosis, he says to her, and looking at the boy. Dieter casually advances from behind the protection of his sister's arms and steps right up to face the German officer. And cousin of Dr. Death, you have blood on your hands, Dieter says, with a bit more confidence than anyone else present, including the wide-eyed guards standing and watching curiously the whole exchange. The girl moves up behind her brother with the added strength of a lioness as she eyes the true fear crosses the colonel's face. Esther stares at his face, which is even older appearing than she had remembered, much older than her father's. His drooping dark eyes, his oversized jowls, and long, large nose have a hook of sadness, but not out of empathy, but something dark. He has the look of a man who's truly sad, not merely selfish, lacking desire to share. His driving desire is that no one else has what he already has, a greed for life. She realizes to herself and says, you've accomplished nothing and you never will. With each motion she makes towards him, he pulls back one in response. Her gaze alone is enough to cause him to call. You cannot touch my family again. Your face mimics what you already have done, but you will never touch our souls. That comment hit the doctor right in the face like a slap. With his own wide-eyed realization was further coupled with the thought, did I have guilt written all over my face? He felt for the first time fear as the young boy stepped up with all the courage of David facing the Goliath and said, you better ask God to wash that blood off your hands and face. You don't have much time before the day of reckoning is upon you. Dieter reaches out and only lightly touches the doctor's right arm with his own left hand, sending what felt like a shocking electricity up his arm and down his left leg, down his leg, shooting directly into the same side, into the brain behind his eye, like a bolt of lightning. For a moment, the colonel, only slightly larger than the boy himself, seemed unable to release himself from the grip of the young lad, even though he seemed to pull with all his might. This only brought confusing looks on the faces of the two soldiers watching, wondering themselves if the doctor actually wished to pull away at all. And what were their orders? The great Dr. Blood finally almost fell back in shock as Dieter let go of the arm with a smile, turning back to his sister with an almost casual step as they walked away. The colonel, on the other hand, turned without another word, hurrying out of the hall like he saw a ghost. A profound limp suddenly appeared in his step. For many, life is about discovery. For a few, overcoming great diversity results in the fulfillment of an even greater accomplishment. Some would say a life cut short is a tragedy, but I would say the greatest tragedy is an unaccomplished life, for that is not a life at all, but a true waste. All right, my friends, that was chapter 13, Padded Cell. And this is the Hooded Vigilante reading Hunting Fields by Dr. Peter Colla. Bless you. Until tomorrow.